On the morning of August 15, 1943, an invasion fleet approached Kiska through the Aleutian fog. Landing craft carried American troops toward a coast expected to be defended by thousands of Japanese soldiers. Warships and aircraft had struck the island before them. Now the beaches were silent, but silence was not reassuring. 3 months earlier, on another island in the same chain, American troops had also reached quiet beaches. The defenders had been waiting in the mountains. On Attu, silence had been a warning. This time, more than 34,000 American and Canadian troops, including roughly 5,000 Canadians, had been assembled for the assault. Allied intelligence had estimated about 10,000 Japanese defenders. If those defenders had pulled back into Kiska's ridges and valleys, the landing force was moving toward a battle even larger than Attu. If they had not, then one of the biggest amphibious operations of the Aleutian campaign was landing on an island the enemy had already left. The problem was that the fog offered no immediate way to tell which reality was waiting. Kiska had been under Japanese occupation since early June 1942. Its harbor became the center of a developed base with roads, tunnels, camps, seaplane and submarine facilities, and defensive positions. Sources use different definitions, but institutional accounts place the developed garrison at roughly 7,000, while Allied intelligence later estimated about 10,000. It was the stronger and more obvious target. Yet Allied planners chose Attu first, partly because Attu appeared less heavily defended and because taking it would further threaten Kiska's communications. The decision produced a victory, but not an easy one. When Americans landed on Attu in May 1943, the Japanese did not try to stop them at the water. They had withdrawn into high ground, where fog, cold, steep terrain, and prepared positions favored the defense. The U.S. Army recorded 449 Americans dead, 1,148 wounded, and about 2,100 removed by disease and non-battle injury. Almost the entire Japanese garrison was killed. Attu taught a brutal lesson. An empty beach could be the most dangerous kind of welcome. That lesson shaped the central expectations and preparations for Kiska. Training intensified. Clothing, medical support, bombardment, and assault strength were expanded. The assigned ground force grew to 34,426 gigs, more than twice the strength considered earlier. This was not preparation for a comic mistake. It was preparation by people who had just seen what happened when terrain, weather, and a determined garrison were underestimated. The logic was understandable. The danger was that Attu had become more than a warning. It had become the pattern through which every new clue was read. While the Allies prepared for a larger battle, Japan was deciding that Kiska could no longer be held. Allied airfields had moved westward. Sea pressure tightened. After Attu fell, the remaining garrison on Kiska was isolated. Japanese headquarters decided to abandon the island, with high-level and local orders appearing at different points in May and June. An early withdrawal by submarine removed about 800 personnel, including sick and wounded troops. But submarine losses and damage made that method too dangerous to continue. The problem then passed to Rear Admiral Masatomi Kimura. More than 5,000 people still had to be removed from a harbor under Allied pressure. Kimura's cruisers and destroyers needed fog thick enough to conceal their approach, yet manageable enough to enter, load the garrison, and escape without collision or interception. An earlier attempt was abandoned when conditions did not cooperate. The evacuation force returned. This time, the weather that made Kiska so difficult to observe became the Japanese plan's greatest protection. On 28 July, by Allied dating, 29th of July in the Japanese local time account, Kimura's ships entered Kiska harbor. The remaining 5,183 personnel embarked in less than an hour. The ships withdrew without being intercepted. No climactic land battle followed Attu. no last stand took place in Kiska's hills. The garrison vanished behind the same fog that had made the island seem impossible to read. And as the Japanese force disappeared, the Allied invasion force kept growing. The evacuation did not remove every danger. Mines, anti-personnel devices, abandoned explosives, damaged equipment, and military infrastructure remained. But the central fact had changed. There was no Japanese combat force left to oppose a landing. The decisive question was no longer whether Japan could hold Kiska. It was whether the Allies would recognize that Kiska was now a different problem from Attu. There were clues. Reconnaissance in late July showed reduced activity, unrepaired bomb damage, radio silence, weaker anti-aircraft fire, and equipment that seemed removed or unchanged. These signs did not all appear at once, but together they supported the possibility of evacuation. Some analysts reached that conclusion. Suggestions were made for more reconnaissance or an advanced scouting party. But other reports claimed activity or anti-aircraft fire that was not actually present. Fog repeatedly limited observation, and Attu supplied a ready explanation for absence. The Japanese had left the exposed positions and moved into the hills. That interpretation fit recent experience. It also made every quiet gun position potentially deceptive and every lack of movement potentially deliberate. In retrospect, military analysts have described the episode as a warning about perceptual or confirmation bias. The evidence was not missing. It was being forced to compete with a memory powerful enough to explain it away. Commanders continued toward the assault. Air and naval attacks struck Kiska after the evacuation because the withdrawal had not been accepted as established fact. The invasion force sailed from Adak on August 13th. By then, planning, shipping, bombardment, and tens of thousands of troops were moving toward the same objective. Canceling would have required confidence that the garrison was gone. Proceeding required only the fear that Attu might happen again. American troops began landing on August 15th, and about 6,500 were ashore on the western side by late afternoon. The main Canadian Brigade landing followed farther north on August 16th. Fog and rain restricted visibility as units moved through terrain filled with abandoned positions and explosives. The troops did not possess the audience's knowledge. They had been briefed for resistance from a force estimated at about 10,000, and the recent precedent said defenders might be waiting above them. In those conditions, uncertain movement and gunfire could be interpreted as enemy contact. Friendly personnel sometimes fired on one another. Fusilier D.Y. Mills was severely wounded through the spine by unidentified machine gun fire in thick fog. The official Canadian report does not identify who fired the shot. Mines, abandoned ordnance, work and vehicle accidents, sickness, exposure, and cold injury created other kinds of harm. No single reliable official table divides every American casualty among those causes, and the story becomes false when they are all compressed into friendly fire. As troops searched the island, the evidence became unavoidable. Defensive positions were empty. Tunnels and camps held no combat force. The feared garrison was not concealed in the high ground. It was already beyond Allied reach. An assault built to overcome perhaps 10,000 defenders had become an armed occupation of abandoned defenses. The contradiction is extraordinary. But this is the point where the popular version usually turns real people into a punchline. The island was undefended. It was not harmless. During the first 4 days ashore, the Army recorded 21 dead and 121 sick or wounded. By the end of the search, it recorded 313 American casualties in all. Those figures do not mean 313 Americans were killed. They do not mean all 313 were shot by friendly troops. They are scoped official totals that include causes the surviving records do not completely reconcile. a separate Army medical study recorded wordy cold injuries among approximately 20 Adamsidi Sudani in 450 occupation participants. That medical figure cannot safely be added to or subtracted from the 313 aggregate. The Canadian record uses a different window. In a separate report running through the end of October, Canada recorded 4 killed and some 30 wounded, sick, or injured. The 4 deaths did not come from one confused American-Canadian firefight. They happened on different dates and through distinct hazards left by the occupation or encountered during later work. Lieutenant Sidney Vesey was killed by a concealed landmine on August 17th. Private Peter Poshtar was killed by Japanese anti-personnel mines on August 22nd. Private Gaston Boisclair died on August 29th when a Japanese mortar grenade he had found exploded. Private Gerard Desjardins died on September 28th when a heavy-caliber American naval shell exploded during work. The official report classified the first 2 deaths as enemy action and the latter 2 as accidental. Their names and the differences between their deaths matter because the convenient myth erases both. The sea added another, separate loss. Early on 18 August, USS Abner Read suffered a mine-attributed underwater explosion while patrolling off Kiska. The blast tore away the destroyer's stern. Crewmen rescued survivors from the cold water, fought to keep the damaged ship afloat, and helped bring it under tow to Adak. The detailed Navy ship history records 1 known dead, 70 missing, and 47 wounded. The ship survived. Many of the men at its stern did not return. The mine that struck Abner Read, the mines ashore, and abandoned Japanese explosives are why "there was no enemy" is too simple. No Japanese troops remained, but enemy-created hazards did. Other losses came from fear, weather, illness, accidents, and the dangerous work of occupying a fortified island. The causes were different. The reporting windows were different. What united them was that the disappearance of the garrison did not make the operation safe. Kiska was declared secure on August 24th, ending the Japanese foothold in the Aleutians. Allied commanders could argue that overwhelming pressure had helped persuade Japan to evacuate and that the operation provided amphibious and logistical experience. Kincaid later described the Japanese decision to withdraw rather than fight as part of the reward for the forces involved. That was his defense of the operation. It did not erase the intelligence failure or the people killed, wounded, sick, injured, and missing. The deeper lesson is not that the Allies prepared too seriously. After Attu, serious preparation was rational. The failure came when a valid lesson hardened into an answer. Quiet beaches had concealed defenders on Attu, so quiet positions on Kiska were interpreted as another concealed defense. Evidence of evacuation could be absorbed into the same theory. Fewer guns, fewer transmissions, fewer visible troops, because they must have moved into the hills. Experience had supplied the right question and then hardened into the wrong answer. On Attu, silence meant the enemy was waiting. On Kiska, silence meant the enemy had escaped. The fog did not lie. The empty positions did not lie. They simply could not explain themselves. People had to decide what the evidence meant, and they did so under the pressure of the last battle, the next possible catastrophe, and the cost of being wrong. Kiska's warning is that history can teach 2 opposite lessons with the same quiet shore. Experience protects us only while we remain willing to discover that this time the silence means something else.